Hello everyone, and welcome to the Youth Cooking School video where we will be making chicken lazone today with pasta noodles and a side of asparagus. This is going to be a very yummy recipe and it's kind of fancy, so your family is all going to be very impressed by you by the end of this video and when you finish up this recipe. So to begin, we are going to go through all of the ingredients that you need for this recipe, and then we'll go through the step-by-step process of how to make this dinner. So if you look at your recipe list on the ingredients, it calls for 1 pound of skinless chicken breast, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, 1 pound of linguine, and if you have pasta, that's fine too. It's just going to be 1 box of noodles. You will need garlic. You will need half and half kosher salt and black pepper. You will need fresh parsley leaves to top it at the very end if you choose to do so. And then you will need a list of seasonings to go with this. So for this, it does call for smoked paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne pepper, dried oregano, dried basil, and then again, salt and pepper, and you'll add as much as you want as far as the amount goes. You will also need asparagus, and then everything else I said already is going to be included to make the asparagus. So once you have all your ingredients laid out, ready to go, we will begin this process. So if you look at your instructions, it instructs you on number 1 to make your seasoning first. And so for the seasoning, I'm gonna just lay them all out in front of me because all of the measurements are going to be 1/2 of a teaspoon. And so I'm gonna lay them all out here and then we'll measure and I'm gonna put them into this small bowl. So in this, it looks like we need our smoked paprika, which is here. I need my garlic powder, my onion powder, my cayenne pepper, dried oregano, dried basil, and then at the end, just a little salt and pepper if you choose to do so. So for this, it does say for each of these seasonings in front of me, other than the salt and pepper, I am going to put 1/2 of a teaspoon into my bowl. And so I have 1 teaspoon here, and I actually do have a 1/2 teaspoon measuring utensil, so I'm actually going to use this, and I'm just going to fill it to the top for each one and add it to my bowl. A little tip, if your seasonings you're using have the small holes in it, it may be hard to get that into your measuring utensil. So for most seasonings, you can just screw the top off. And you do want to use a plate like I mentioned in a few of my videos already so that any of the extras don't go into your mixture right here. It's gonna just go onto the plate. And so be very careful so the whole thing doesn't dump out. And you're just slowly going to pour it in till it gets to the top. You wanna get it as close as you can, like that. And I'm just gonna add it in to my small bowl. So I'm done with my garlic powder. Next, I'm gonna do my onion powder. Again, I just took the top off since it's easier for me to eyeball how much is there. And again, pour it in. If you do not like one of the seasoning flavors we are putting in, no problem, you can feel free to leave that out of the recipe. So for this, actually, it's not a twist off, and so I can peel it off. It's a little difficult, but you can peel it off like that. So again, it's just easier to measure out. Woo! So you can see here, I poured a little too much, but at least it did not go into my mixture that I already have made. That was my smoked paprika. Next, I'm going to do my cayenne pepper. This is pretty hot for some people, so if you do not like it too hot, I would recommend doing just a small portion of this. But if you do smell it, you can smell it's a little strong. Another way, you can just put your scoop into it and just kind of level it off like that. That's another way to get your measurement. So that is my cayenne pepper. Next, I am going to do my dried oregano. Smells delicious. Again, just put that into my mixture. And last but not least, I am going to do my basil. I love the smell of basil. And again, whoop, just pour it into my bowl. And so, as far as salt and pepper, there will be a chance to add this towards the end. And so if you want to just add a little, you can. I'm not gonna add too much just because I am gonna add it again at the end. So just about 4 shakes of each for the salt and the pepper. So you can see my mixture kind of right now. I'm mixing it up in the bowl, and you can just do this with a spoon or a fork or any utensil you have, and just kind of stir that up. That is blended now. So on number 2, we mixed all of our seasonings into a small bowl. So we're done with step number 1. Step number 2, in a gallon-sized Ziploc bag, add chicken, olive oil, and paprika mixture, shaking to coat it thoroughly. So I'm going to take my gallon bag. If you do not have a gallon bag to use, totally fine. You can just put this on a plate or a bowl, and you can just put the seasoning, the olive oil, and your chicken in, and just kind of use your hands to flip it around. And basically you just want to make sure that your chicken is coated with the olive oil we put in, as well as all of the seasonings we just mixed up. So either or will work. I am going to use the plastic bag though today, since it is on the instructions. And so you do want to add the chicken last. So for the mixture, again, we are going to put the olive oil in, and it does ask for 1 tablespoon of olive oil. So tablespoon is gonna be about that size, it's 1 tablespoon. And I'm going to take my olive oil and fill this up and then place it into my bag. Okay, I'm then going to place my seasoning mix inside the bag as well. So I have oil, my olive oil and my seasonings in my bag. If you're doing this on a plate, you can just put your chicken on a plate or on a bowl and just put on the olive oil and put all the seasonings on and start mixing. We're going to do the chicken last in the bag since our hands have been clean up until this point. Before you put the chicken in the bag, I have already cut the fat off of my chicken. So I do recommend that you cut the fat off of your chicken before you mix this, and as well as cutting it in half. So you're gonna have your chicken breast, and I think these 2 pieces were together, and you're just going to go cut it long ways down the center like this so that you have two thinner pieces of the chicken breast. And mine were pretty long, and so for an example, these two were together and I just wanted smaller pieces of chicken, and so I just cut these in half. And so whatever you decide to do, just make sure that all of your chicken is about the same size. So you can see here, I did use 2 large chicken breasts and just cut them in half because that was about a pound, and then just cut them into smaller pieces just because I think that's easier to cook sometimes. So I'm going to take all of my pieces of chicken, throw it into the bag. And again, you can do this on a plate too, and you're just going to mix this up. Make sure your zipper is closed because you do not want this going everywhere. You will have a mess to clean up. So shake it for about 5 to 10 more seconds. Sometimes the seasoning will get caught in the corners if you are using a bag. So just make sure you get the corners and just put it all over your chicken. If you feel you would like to add more seasoning at this time, you are more than welcome to add additional seasoning into it. If you feel it does not have enough, you can also add a little more olive oil than if you do that. I think mine looks pretty good. Here's my bag. It is no longer just plain chicken. You can see it's pretty dark and it has all of my seasonings on it. So I'm really happy the way it turned out, so I'm just gonna keep it like that. So after you have seasoned your chicken in the bag or a bowl or a plate, the next step is going to be moving to step number 3, which is melt 2 tablespoons of butter in a large skillet over medium-high heat. Add chicken and cook, flipping once until cooked through, and cook each side about 4 to 5 minutes. And so I am now going to take my 2 tablespoons of butter and put it in my skillet. And again, if you are using butter like this in like a stick form, if you look on the butter, it'll actually have measurements on there for you. And so I love that. I think it's so convenient. It's so much easier than just trying to use like my utensils. And so for the butter, again, it asks for 2 tablespoons. So on the top, the smaller lines are going to be teaspoons, and on the bottom I have tablespoons, so that's what we're going to use right now, and it does ask for 2. And so I actually already cut mine, and so this is my 2 tablespoons that I'm going to use. You will unwrap it and you're going to put it in a skillet. This is the size skillet I'm going to use. You will need 2 skillets and a pot for this recipe. And so if you're trying to figure out what skillet to use, I do recommend using your second to largest skillet now for the chicken, and then your largest skillet for the pasta, because at the end, everything, you can't have everything mixed in the last pot. And so I do recommend saving this for the end, but you can do it either way. That's just my preference. All right, so again, taking my 2 tablespoons of butter, putting it into my skillet. And then it says to melt it on medium-high heat. So again, if you have a stove that has low to high and then it's 1 through 10, this will be about a 5. So we're gonna let that cook for a moment. So it says on step number 3, have your butter melt in a large skillet on medium-high heat. So that's what we're doing now. Again, I did put it at the middle just because I don't want the butter to burn before I get over there to put my chicken on. So it does say next to add chicken and cook, flipping about halfway through. So again, 4 to 5 minutes on each side, depending how thick your chicken breast is. And so I'm going to take my bag, make sure it all looks good as far as the seasoning goes. It looks very good. And the butter is melting still, but that's fine. It does not have to be completely melted at this point. I'm gonna go ahead and just pour this in now. So now that the raw chicken's in the skillet, go ahead and just quickly wash your hands so we have fresh, clean hands for the rest of our recipe. So go ahead and take your spatula and you are going to just take your chicken and you want to kind of mix up the butter and just kind of lay out the chicken so it's evenly distributed throughout your pan. And so it does say cook for about 4 to 5 minutes on each side. So we're gonna keep that in mind right now. Feel free to set a timer if you feel that you need to. So I'm gonna go ahead and just set a timer so when we're going through the video, we don't forget together. It smells very good. I can smell all the flavors. So while that's sitting there cooking, again, for 4 to 5 minutes on the first side, we are going to go ahead and prep our asparagus. And so the goal of this is to have everything come out at the same time or as close as possible so that everything's warm. So for your asparagus, you will need a cutting board, and you're gonna make sure your asparagus is washed. If you're hesitant to try asparagus, I promise I was too the first time and it is delicious and tastes so much better whenever you do what we are going to do today and it comes out of the oven. So I do want to show you on your asparagus, this is what the asparagus looks like. This is gonna be the bottom where the root is. And so you do want to cut off probably about that much. Some people may prefer to eat this part and that's totally fine. My preference is to cut off about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches, just so that white part or the lighter part is gone, just because that's gonna be harder and it's just not as flavorful. That may be my preference, so if you do prefer to eat that, go ahead and leave it. So you can see that's about how much I cut off. That maybe have been a little much. I could have gone a little lower, but that's an example. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the asparagus that I'm going to use today. And just cut this off. All of them are gonna be a little different as far as how much you're gonna have to cut off. For an example, you can see here that these two look very different. And so what I'm going to cut off of the bottom of this one is going to be different than what I cut off in that one. So again, just kind of that white part. If you want to follow what I am doing just because I don't like the bottom of the asparagus. Feel free to use the whole bag that you have for the recipe today, or if you just want to make a small portion of it, that's fine too. Whatever you prefer is fine. The recipe will still be the same. Okay, so for today, that is what I'm going to use. So I have my asparagus cut up, and what you're going to do is get your olive oil out. And you can do this a few different ways. You can go ahead and drizzle it onto the asparagus on your pan, not very much, but you can drizzle it on, or if you want to put it in a bowl, you can do that too. So for today, I am going to put it in a bowl just because it'll be less messy on my pan. And so you'll take the olive oil, and I would recommend putting a teaspoon into it. Putting a tablespoon into it. If it's not the exact measurement, that's okay, but I would say about a tablespoon would be good. Put that all over your asparagus. You are then going to just mix that up. And you want to make sure that everything is coated in the asparagus, because if not, it's going to affect how it's cooked. So this is good. I can feel everything has that olive oil on it. It'll be very silky. The next step is going to be adding salt, pepper, and a little garlic powder. You don't need much at all of this. So I put my salt on. I probably did about 5 shakes. Same for the pepper. And then garlic powder, I'm not going to put as much just because it does have a stronger flavor. So that's all on, I'm gonna mix it. All right, so it has been 4 minutes now. And so I'm going to check my chicken on the one side. So it's looking really good. I'm gonna go ahead and take one out so you can see what the bottom has looked like so far. So you can see here that chicken is starting to look less raw. So it's starting to cook. This is gonna be the raw side still. So that's the top. This is going to be the bottom. So it's starting to have more of like a crisp look to it. So I'm gonna leave that on for about 1 more minute, and I'm going to turn my heat up now to about 6.5, just so it can really start to cook that bottom layer. So the asparagus is now coated in our seasoning and olive oil, and you're just gonna use a pan like this, and you're just going to put it onto the pan, line it up, make sure there's no pieces covering each other like that, because that can affect the cooking as well. And we're gonna set that to the side. Your hands are probably oily like me, so go ahead and just wash them off. All right, so on your instructions, it does say to preheat the oven to 450, so go ahead and preheat that oven now. And You can preheat the oven right when you start cooking in the beginning, but you can also do it now. It will all end up the same once we're finished. Okay, so while the oven is preheating, we are going to just set the asparagus to the side and move on to the next step for our chicken Lazone dinner. So we are still on number 3, and we are still letting our chicken cook thoroughly. So I just showed you what mine looked like. I do want it to get a little more cooked on the one side before I flip it. So I'm gonna give that probably 1 more minute. And I did just turn it up a little, so now it's pretty high. It's about 8, between 7 and 8, and I can kind of hear it starting to sizzle, which is totally fine. Just make sure you watch it so it does not burn. It is starting to bubble now. So the next step is going to be cooking our linguine or whatever pasta you have for this recipe. So it does call for 1 pound. And if you're confused if you have a pound or not, if you look on your box of pasta, it will actually show you how much pasta you have in the corner. And so for mine, it does say 16 ounces, and then in parentheses, it does say 1 pound. So if you are following this recipe exactly, you will use the whole thing today. So for number 4, step that we're on, in a large pot of boiling salted water, cook pasta to the package instructions. So go ahead and get a pot. This is what I'm using. And I actually already have water in my pot, but go ahead and fill it up, probably 3/4 of the way full, just kind of depending on how much pasta you're using. But if you do look at your instructions on the box, depending on what pasta you have, it'll go ahead and tell you how much water to add in. And really, you cannot add too much water in this because we will be draining it into a drainer to get all the water out at the end, so at the end we just have the cooked pasta. So there's a couple ways to cook this. You can use your pasta and keep it like this. So if you like it long and you like to take your fork and kind of spin it, go ahead and keep it longer. If you prefer to have a shorter amount of pasta, totally fine too. You'll just cut it in half and cook it like this. Either or will work for this dinner. It's really your preference. Also, depending on how big your pot is, where the water is boiling, it will depend on how big your pasta can be. So I do hear my chicken really starting to cook, so I'm going to go ahead and check on that now. So I turned it down just a little bit because I think that side's cooked pretty good. I will show you guys what the bottom of mine looks like. So it actually looks perfect. It's starting to get a little bronze. It's starting to get a little bronze, but you can still see the side is still raw. And if it looks a little burnt, it's totally not burnt. It's just all of your seasonings starting to soak up that butter and everything in the skillet. So at this time, if you have not already done so, go ahead and take your spatula, and we're going to just flip over all of those pieces of chicken so now the raw side can cook on the bottom of the skillet. So I have my skillet at about medium heat, and if your skillet looks a little dry, feel free to add a little water or a little more olive oil if you need it. I'm going to add about 1/2 of a tablespoon into it just because mine's looking a little dry. You have not done anything wrong. Your chicken is just really soaking that up. And it also depends on what heat you have it on. So I'm just gonna add a little more in just to make sure it cooks all evenly. And I'm just going to go ahead and stir up what I just added in. If you would like and you have a lid for your skillet, you could put the lid on if you would prefer. I'm just keeping it open just because we're kind of juggling a couple different things at the same time. So again, I'm gonna go let that cook for about 4 to 5 minutes, and I'm gonna put a timer on just so I don't forget. So I put it on for 5 minutes. So now I'm going to check my boiling water, see if it's boiling yet. You will add just a few dashes of salt. This does help your pasta cook more evenly and it will taste very good. Again, not much at all, just a couple dashes in there. So I am boiling, so I'm just gonna add a few dashes of salt. Give that a minute. If you're boiling right now for your pasta in your pot, go ahead and add in your noodles now. The uncooked noodles, go ahead and add that in. If not, feel free to wait a couple minutes. Also, go ahead and check your stove, see if you are preheated yet. So it looks like I'm at 325, so I'm almost there. Most stoves will beep once you are preheated, and so that'll be a good reminder. If you hear that, that means you can go ahead and put the asparagus in. And the asparagus is going to go in for about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on your stove and depending on how big your asparagus is. Okay. It looks like my pot is boiling now for my pasta. So I'm going to go ahead and add in all of the uncooked pasta. And again, you can leave your pasta long, or you can cut it in half, whatever you prefer. Alright, so my uncooked pasta is all in my pot, and so I did put a lid on my pot just to help it cook a little faster, so you can put a lid on or you don't have to, whatever you prefer. I have 2 more minutes on my chicken, and so I'm just going to make sure it's not burning in any way. It looks very good. Probably just a couple more minutes and this chicken will be done. My oven is now preheated, and so I'm going to take my asparagus on my pan and I'm going to put my asparagus in for 12 to 15 minutes. I would start lower so you can check it, and then if you feel it needs a little bit more time, go ahead and just watch it and extend that time. So I do recommend starting at 12 minutes. Okay. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, right now so far we have our chicken on the skillet. We've done one side so far, we flipped it. It should almost be cooked. According to my timer, I have 30 more seconds for that. You should have your asparagus in the oven if it's preheated. If not, totally fine. Go ahead and wait until that asparagus is preheated, and then go ahead and put that in the oven for 12 to 15 minutes. And then also we should have our pasta in our pot, and you can have the lid on or off for the chicken and the pasta. It's your preference. To stir the pasta, I'm going to use this utensil. I'm going to use this utensil, and I did just put on my timer 12 minutes for the asparagus, so I can watch that closely. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my pasta and make sure it's not sticking to the pan. Sometimes it tends to do that, so you just want to make sure you watch it and you stir it. Okay, it's coming together very nicely. So now my timer went off for my chicken. So again, just to recap, for the chicken, you want to cook it for about 4 to 5 minutes on each side. I think my chicken was a little thicker, so I think I did about 6 minutes on each side. But I'm gonna go and check and see if it's cooked yet. And so how you can do this is you'll take a piece of chicken and you'll put it onto a plate. Make sure it's a clean plate that has not had any raw chicken on it yet. And you're just gonna take a small knife and just gently cut it in half. And you wanna make sure there's no pink in there. And so just to be sure, kind of a tip is to grab the biggest piece of chicken, so like your thickest, whitest piece of chicken, and you wanna check that. Because most likely if that one is already cooked through, the rest will be as well. If you feel uncomfortable or nervous, feel free to check every single one of the pieces of chicken that you have in your skillet. But I'm gonna go ahead and grab the biggest one right now with my fork and my spatula, and I'm gonna check that out. So I did just put my skillet with the chicken on low, the very lowest it can go. That way it won't cook anymore unless I want it to. So again, I'm just going to cut this piece of chicken kind of in half and look. And it looks good. And so I'm gonna cut it in half just so you all can see what it should look like. So if you do have your lid on your pasta, make sure you're watching it so it does not overboil like it almost just did to me. So I am having some pretty big bubbles in the pasta, so that means it's really cooking and it's probably almost done. So back to the chicken, you can see here it's fully cooked on this side. Again, it's fully cooked on this side as well. Not burnt, that's just the seasoning. And then the inside is going to look like this. So you can see it's fully cooked. We don't have that raw look at all anymore. It's fully cooked, white, yummy chicken. And that was my thickest piece, so I'm pretty confident that everything else is cooked. But again, if you're a little nervous, if this is your first time cooking chicken, feel free to just put it on a plate and kind of check each one to be sure. So this is what my skillet looks like right now with my chicken. You can see I have lots of seasoning in there, that's why it looks brown, but nothing's burnt at all. And so that's why it's really important to check the heat And don't put it on high right away. You want to slowly cook that. So at this time, I'm going to go back and check my pasta to see if that's done. But before I do that, I'm going to cover my chicken just with a lid so it stays warm until everything is done. And so I am going to put my chicken on low, or you can turn it off. Either or will work for this. And I actually decided, since it's cooked exactly how I want it, I just turned my stove on the skillet off and I put the lid on. So that's going to just sit there until I'm ready for the chicken. The pasta is looking good, probably just a couple more minutes on my pasta. So the next step is step number 5. So I know it's taken a while for us to get here, but we have everything cooking. This is the final, basically the final step to complete this dinner. So it says, melt remaining 2 tablespoons of butter in a skillet. So this skillet is where you're going to add your pasta. So that's why I said your largest skillet, save to the very end. So I'm going to use this size skillet. It's nice because it has those edges and that kind of helps protect anything that could possibly fall out. And so it does say you're going to take your butter and you'll put that in. And then it said add your garlic and then you'll cook, stirring it frequently for about 1 minute. So here is the garlic that we are using for this recipe. And it does say 2 cloves of garlic. So if you do look in your book that you received for this, your recipe book, some tips, tricks, there's a conversion chart on there. It possibly would have a conversion for this. So that's just an example of why you would use that chart in that booklet. But for your preference, I already did the research, looked it up. So 2 cloves of garlic is going to be 2 to 3 teaspoons of this. So this is my 1 teaspoon measuring utensil. And depending on how much you love garlic, you can add 2 to 3. If you prefer more, that's fine. This is very strong. So if you like garlic, but you don't want to overpower your meal, I would recommend starting with 2, and you can always add more. But there's so many flavors in this already. As you can see, we've added tons of different seasonings into our recipe, so we want to make sure we don't take away. So I recommend doing 2 teaspoons, but 2 to 3 would be equal to what the recipe is asking. So I'm just dipping it in here, super easy. You can see there's 1, and then there's 2. So this is what my skillet looks like right now. And I have a pretty full stove over here, and so I'm going to check the pasta and see how that's looking because I need the pasta to put into here next. So I think it's done, so let's go ahead and check that. So it seems done to me. A trick that I actually learned when I was younger, when I went to a cooking camp, was to take a piece of pasta and fling it onto your cabinet, and if it sticks, it's done. I don't recommend you doing that. Ask your parents first to see if that's okay, but that is one way you can tell. So I'll go ahead and try it out and see if it actually works. So it's pretty hot, so let it cool for a minute. All right, let's see how this goes. You can see here, it did stick, and so I know my pasta is done. So again, make sure you ask your family, parents first before you do that. They may not be too happy with you doing that, so double check first before you do that. But that's just a little trick that I learned once to make sure it's done. So now, you will need some type of thing to drain all of the water out, and you just want your pasta to sit here. So I like to just set this in my sink, and then I take my pan and I just pour it in. I'm not super strong and I can't really hold both at once, so just setting it in the sink and taking your pan of pasta and water, your pan of pasta and water, pouring it in is how I'm going to do it. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so you can see now, this is all of my pasta, water drained out, okay? So set that to the side. So it says melt 2 tablespoons of butter in a large skillet over medium heat. Let's see. Sorry, I'm getting confused what step we're on here. So yeah, step number 5, melt 2 tablespoons of butter in a skillet. Add garlic and cook until it has all melted. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this on the skillet to do that. So that is melting. Now, it says next to add your half and half in. And so if we look back at the ingredients, it does say to have 2 cups of half and half. And so you're gonna get your measuring cup. My measuring cup has 2 cups here, so that works out great. If yours only has 1, you'll just do this twice. And this is going to help make kind of our pasta sauce that we're wanting for this recipe. So we have our half and half now in our measuring cup, 2 cups of it. And it says to gradually whisk in half and half. Let me get that one moment. So it says to gradually mix in your half and half until slightly thickened, about 4 to 5 minutes. And then you can season this with salt and pepper if you prefer. So remember in the beginning of the video, I said you could add it then, totally fine. If you want to add some more now, that's fine too. So I am going to now pour this into my butter and garlic pan that I have going since it's totally melted. And I'm going to use a clean spatula to stir that all up. So my asparagus went off at 12 minutes, and so I did check it. I'm gonna give it just a couple more minutes and then I'll take it out just because I like mine pretty tender. Another option, if you would like to add any Parmesan to your asparagus, you can go and add it on now and let it cook for about 2 minutes. And after that, it can just kind of bake in there for 2 minutes and take it out, and then it'll be really good. Okay, So we're on step number 5 still. We have put our butter in our skillet. We have added the garlic. I stirred that up. I gradually put in the half and half. And I'm now going to take my whisk and just kind of stir it slowly until it starts to thicken. The next step will be to take our pasta and put it into the skillet that has my half and half in it with the butter and the garlic. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I am now going to probably take out my asparagus as I think it's probably done now. When you are removing something from the oven, you do want to make sure you're using an oven mitt. If you do not have an oven mitt, you can use a kitchen towel. Make sure it's pretty thick so you do not burn yourself. So you do want to be very careful when you do this. And you also want to make sure before you take it out that you have a spot for it on your stove or somewhere. So if you're going to set it on your counter, have 2 separate pot holders sitting there so when you take it out, it won't hurt your counter. And so it looks like I'm gonna do that because my stove looks pretty full and yours probably does too. So here's 2 oven mitts. And I'm going to take it out and just set the pan on my oven mitts. At this time, you will go ahead and turn your oven off. Most ovens will have a button that says clear or off, and you'll just press that button. So I'm gonna let this cool before I show you, but the asparagus looks awesome. It smells really good. It's lightly browned, exactly how I liked it cooked. So your chicken is now cooked. The asparagus is done. I'm now going to check on my kind of sauce that we're making to tie it all together. It is looking very good. If you would like to speed this up, you can take a lid and put it over your pan right now that has the butter, garlic, and half, just to make it thicker, faster. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so we'll let that warm just a couple minutes and then we'll add the pasta and we'll be done. And so, that's really starting to cook and I can kind of see it bubbling now, so that's awesome. So after you do that, again, you can add pepper, salt into that mix if you would like. I've already added it, so I'm not gonna add any more, but feel free to add more if you would like a little more flavor. Okay, so all we have left is to add the pasta into that mix. You do want it to be pretty thick before you add it in though. Mine was still pretty liquidy, so to speed that process up, I just put my lid onto my pan, and that's really gonna start getting it all mixed up together and get it thick. Okay, so then after we add the pasta into here, the only step we have left is to put it all together. So we are almost done. Hang in there with me, everyone. So it's actually starting to bubble up, so that tells me this is really cooking, and you want to make sure you don't overcook it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the lid off and stir it up a little. So I'm probably going to give that about 1 more minute and we should be rocking and rolling. I'm going to get my plate out because I'm going to put everything, the final product, on my plate. So the very last thing that we'll do is add garnished parsley. And so I actually have parsley in a pot in my backyard, and so I'm actually going to use fresh parsley for this. You can smell it, it tastes really good, it tastes fresh, but it also just makes the dish look really nice and even fancier than it really is. If you do not have fresh parsley in your backyard, at your house, totally fine. They actually make one that you can buy at the store. I know it's a big surprise. And feel free to just sprinkle this on the top. So you can do either or. I have been nurturing my herbs in the back, so I'm very excited I get to use them today. And so if you're using fresh, you'll just take them off the stems like this. You don't want the stem part. And you can just rip it up. You can cut it if you like, but it does not have to be anything fancy. Just kind of rip it up into small pieces. And you won't add too much, just a small amount, just to give it a little flavor and it'll look nice. Okay, so I'm now going to add my pasta into the mixture with the half and half. Okay, so it is all mixed together now. It's pretty heavy, but you can see that's kind of what it looks like. So everything's mixed together and it almost looks like a fettuccine sauce. So I have mixed that together. I actually put the lid onto my pasta in the half and half just to let it cook for about a few more seconds and then we will be done. So next steps, you can take your chicken and throw it in a pot with your pasta and your sauce if you prefer, or when you're serving this as dinner, you can just have everyone come up to the stove and put together how much they want in it. So just the pasta with the sauce and the chicken. So really either or will work. And so whatever you prefer. So it actually smells just like fettuccine, and it's really starting to get thick now. So I'm going to get my bowl. I actually have the perfect bowl to put this on. It's like a plate, but kind of a small bowl. So I'm going to go ahead and put it all together, garnish it off, and we'll be done. you do have a little extra sauce in your pot, you can take a spoon like this and just scoop it out and put it on your plate. That'll work too. I'm going to grab the chicken I would like. And I'm going to take some of the sauce now and just put it over my chicken. So that's the sauce that we just made can really melt into it. All right, we are almost done. I am going to go ahead and take my fresh parsley now and just put a few leaves on the top. Wow, it looks so good. It looks so fancy, like we're at a fancy restaurant. All right. So now that I have added that, I do want to show you what my asparagus turned out like. So you can see it looks kind of lightly bronze. For a comparison, this was it uncooked. Here's a comparison. This is it uncooked, this is it cooked. So you can see it definitely shrinks a little and it'll have more of a dark look than such a green look. If you would like to keep your asparagus warm, you can keep it in the oven if you would prefer. All right. This is our final product, everyone. Let's see. Look how good that looks. Nice and juicy. That sauce works as a great base for the pasta and it has lots of delicious flavors in there. I cannot wait to enjoy this with my family and I hope you enjoy it as well and you feel like you're at a gourmet restaurant. Thanks for joining in and enjoy!